What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. In this one, we are going to be popping through a new update from OpenAI. It seems like with all of this stuff that's gone on with DeepSeek recently, everybody's trying to clap back at each other with new updates and new cool things. And as a consumer, I'm not complaining because there's some really dope stuff coming out. And so that's what we are going to go through today. We are going to specifically be going through ChatGPT's new deep research functionality that they came out with. I will say for certain use cases, it is pretty awesome. My hope is that by the end of the video, you guys understand which use cases of yours it would make most sense for. I don't think it's necessarily the case that it's going to be the best way to do research for everything, but if you have a topic that's a little bit more involved and requires analysis in order to give you an appropriate response and is not just compiling information and blurting it back out to you, I think that's where these tools are going to shine. So I'm going to go through, I have 4 here, but it's actually a 5th bonus use case that I thought to do. One, we're going to build ourselves a personalized fitness plan. So I'm actually building a custom fitness application for myself in React Native as a side project. And part of that is needing to give the system like an agentic AI logic for how to actually build out fitness plans appropriately. And so we're going to go through doing some research for that, which is going to be pretty cool. Another awesome use case that we're going to go through, building an investment portfolio with specific parameters in place. So like, what do we actually value? What things do we care about? What do we believe is true about the world and the way it's heading? How can we feed that into the system and have it build us a back-tested investment portfolio? So we're going to see what it can do there. Then we give it a little bit of a economic challenge, looking at the world as we see it today through a specific economic lens. And then I gave it, for number 4, a supplement stack that I use, and I asked it to improve on the stack for me. There are specific reasons that I chose some of these. The 5th one, by the way, is having it plan a vacation for us. So let's get into those and look at what we asked it and what type of output we got back from it. So the first thing that I want to show you guys is just the announcement. And let's actually look through this for a few seconds together. So again, if you're a pro member or if you're on one of their other plus or team plans, you will have access to this. The way that you access it, there's just a little button inside of your ChatGPT interface. You can click on that and you are good to go. So let's actually read through this update real quick and just see what some of these changes are actually aimed at doing. So why did we build deep research? Deep research is built for people who do intensive knowledge work in areas like finance, science, policy, and engineering, and need thorough, precise, and reliable research. It can be equally useful for discerning shoppers looking for hyper-personalized recommendations on purchases that typically require careful research, like cars, appliances, furniture. We're going to test it out with travel. We'll see how it goes. Every output is documented. Citations are given. It's particularly effective at finding niche, non-intuitive information that would require browsing numerous websites. I can confirm this is true, by the way. Deep research frees up valuable time, so on and so on. How to use it, it's going to give you a little bit of a rundown here, and then it gives you some specific examples too. So some examples in business, needle in a haystack test, which is more valuable than you'd think. How well can it go out and find a very specific detail in a large body of information? Some interesting examples in medical research, UX, UI design, shopping, general knowledge, and so on. So how it works, there's a lot of already, this thing's only been released for 2 days, and there's people claiming that they've made clones of this thing, which is not actually the case. This deep research model was trained using end-to-end reinforcement learning. Okay, that is different from just taking something like a GPT-4o and having it compile more information than it would otherwise compile and then do some sort of analysis on it. It's using end-to-end reinforcement learning with the O3 model. So it is a different thing. Don't be fooled by a lot of people out there claiming that they've already built a clone for it. Haha. But it's not actually the case. So that being said, let's actually just hop in real quick and look at what this gives us. What I have found so far is that giving a pretty straightforward prompt where you're kind of specific about the type of output that you are looking for is helpful. I'm not saying that you need to give it through, a whole chain of thought and how to reason and all that type of stuff, but you do need to be kind of specific about what it is that you're looking for. One of the things that I like that this system does by default when you ask a question is it asks you appropriate follow-up questions, okay? So for example, in this building me a knowledge base or body of information for how to do exercise programming for hypertrophy specifically, so muscle growth. I asked it to do that. I said the goal would be that I can effectively program my own exercises to reach a goal. So I told it a few topics that it should cover, like macro cycling, periodization protocols, basically telling it you need to think about the broad concepts of how training really works, how a personal trainer, for example, would think about building something out for you, and then just distill this into a body of information basically with this goal in mind, okay? Which is interesting because I think giving it that goal, and you'll see in a second how that influences the outcome of it. And then it asked me these follow-up questions. So it asked me my experience level, training frequency, preferences, equipment that I have access to, specific training goals, injury, things of that nature. I went through and answered it really basically. So told it this is for someone that wants to be able to take themselves from beginner to intermediate stage, right? So I just went through and answered those questions, and it went out and it researched it. So that's another big difference here that was, kind of interesting, is that it doesn't just sit there and process in your face. It says, hey, I'll let you know when it's ready, come back later, basically. And so with this one in particular, about 7 minutes went by and it built me out this ultimate guide. And so it built me this progression framework, beginner to intermediate, and it went through and it did a pretty good job, to be honest, at outlining what are the major variables that I would need to consider, right? So things like volume, the intensity or the load, exercise selection, training frequency, takeaways from that section, and so on. And so it went through and it's got like a lot of really deep documentation in this thing, to be honest. So going through, again, it had that high level and now it's breaking down each of those into detail. Benefits between compound exercises versus isolation exercises, differences in muscle groups, how often you can train them, fundamental movement patterns that humans have. This is a really big one that I was, again, just like generally impressed by. When you think about like building an exercise routine, for example, you want to think through what movement patterns humans have. They can push, they can pull, they can squat, they can hinge, they can rotate, and so on. And so it was able to build that all out and consider that stuff. Went through rep ranges. Just in general, I'm not going to go through this thing in too much detail because that's another thing that you'll find. This gives you huge outputs in some situations, right? So, I'm just scrolling for days here. And it's all really good, detailed information with examples, breaking down actual training days that I could have, linear progression for beginners, understanding the context, right, of the user. Are they intermediate? They could do like an upper-lower split or a push-pull-leg split, and so on. So honestly, really, really, really impressive as a start. And now the next thing that I would do here is read through the output and see like, what do I still need here, right? Where do I need to fill in the blanks would be the next step. And that is what we did here when I asked it to build an investment portfolio. So in this situation, I gave it a little more background because there was more specifics that I wanted it to tell me, okay? And so let's break down what I asked for here. I'd like you to help me build a back-tested investment portfolio, meaning it needs to go back in time and test whatever it tells me it's going to do. It needs to go back and test how that would have performed historically. So it should be based on the general principles of the following people: Jack Bogle, Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, right? So just some generally very well-known, successful people in the investment game, if that's what you want to call it. Very famous investors. And so I said, I want you to analyze what are the fundamental principles and recommendations that these people tend to give others. And so what do I mean specifically that I want you to look at? What is Jack Bogle's recommendation on using index-based funds? What is Ray Dalio's recommendation for having uncorrelated streams of income so that no one downturn can tank your entire portfolio? And then what are some of Warren Buffett's opinions on different things? And then I said, I'd like for you to fuse that with my own personal beliefs and interests, which I thought was pretty cool, and we'll see how this comes into play later. So I wanted them to overweight gold and precious metals for certain economic reasons. Wanted them to avoid U.S. government bonds, preferring strong overseas currencies like Swiss franc or bonds from companies that produce items that would be necessary or even rise in times of recession. Exposure to small and mid-cap companies, exposure to consumer staples and global energy infrastructure, and so on, right? And so I gave it basically what I would think is something I care about if I wanted to build a portfolio. And so again, it went and it asked me different questions. How far back do I want this thing tested? What is my overall risk tolerance? How do I want certain asset classes weighted, and so on? I answered those questions for it. It restated what it was going to do, and then it went out 12 minutes. So considerably longer, almost double the amount of time that our first one went. And I think the reason for that is, one, I was a lot more specific about exactly what I wanted out of this, number one. Number two, I think it's a domain that lends itself a lot more to something that would be considered like deep research, not to poo-poo, bodybuilding or fitness or health and all of that. There's obviously a lot of science behind that type of stuff, but I think when you walk into the world of something like finance or investment advice, a lot more going on, generally speaking. And so I think that's why it took longer. Personally, not entirely sure on that, but it basically went through and it broke me down an entire proposed allocation based on my preferences and what I said I wanted. So broad market index equity funds, so US total stock market, Asia Pacific equities, because I told it I wanted exposure to Asia Pacific or APAC and the Pacific Rim, specifically focusing on mining companies that operate in those areas. I told it I wanted exposure to like high technology and innovation, specifically in the world of AI, cloud computing, and so on. Healthcare, which is just in general something that I care about, specifically biotech. I told it that I wanted it to focus on companies that could be primed for medical breakthroughs, consumer staples, global energy infrastructure, precious metals. So it built me the entire percentage breakdown of these. And then it went and it back tested that performance, right? So it went back in time and said, okay, based on that allocation, how would this have done? And so what I was pretty impressed by with this is that based on the allocation that it gave me, it did exactly what this type of portfolio is meant to do. So if you were to think of like Ray Dalio's all weather or all seasons portfolio, it is meant to do precisely that. It is meant to minimize how deep a drawdown is in times of economic volatility while still benefiting from the upside, even if the benefit of the upside might not necessarily be as high as it would if you had more like risk invested into that area, right? So went through and broke down what the annualized returns are, what the volatility was. It went out and understood that there's this thing called a Sharpe ratio, risk-adjusted returns, and then used that to compare what it was building versus that. Talked about how it mitigated drawdowns considerably compared with other major stock indexes. Talked about how you would want to consider this in different economic seasons, which again is a Ray Dalio principle. So again, it took into context everything it knew about Ray Dalio, plus all of this research that it's done. And then I was super impressed by this area as well, where it went through and said, in these different situations, here's how you would want to rebalance this portfolio. Okay. So in situations where interest rates are rising, which is what I think we're going to continue to have now, rising interest rates with a stagnating economy, how would it fare in that type of situation? And how might you want to consider rebalancing the portfolio during those situations? And so that alone was pretty cool. Went back to like major economic situations and talked about how this would have performed in those situations. Talked about the benefits, like the pros and the cons of this. And I was honestly like pretty on board with a lot of this. And so I said, cool, I want you to go find me specific ETF recommendations. So I want you to take those recommendations and now I want you to go to like actually build me the portfolio. And it said, cool, fill in a few more little details about what it is exactly that you like. And so I did that, boom. And now it went through and it found me exact ETFs that I can use, right? So it found me some Vanguard funds for this APAC diversification, for example, different Vanguard funds, some iShares funds, gave me the returns of those year to date, gold and precious metal exposure, how I could get more of that. Investment grade corporate bonds that exclude US Treasuries, gave me some of those different technology sector options. So honestly, like really, really, really awesome. I was pretty impressed by this one in particular. And this is coming from somebody that isn't an expert, right? I'm not an expert in any of those fields by any stretch of the imagination. I just have my own philosophies about certain things and other certain things that I've heard that make sense. And I'm like, man, that guy's clearly got a brain that seems to make sense of the world around him. Let me see how I can tap into that to do something, right? That's what ultimately what this was about for me. So that being said, let's keep popping through here. And so this is an example of a prompt that I was not as impressed by the output I got from, to be honest. And so I said, please outline for me the main arguments of Austrian economics as it pertains to the state of the world economy over the past few decades and what they would say a solution is. So I think part of the reason we got a kind of a shitty output here, to be honest, is because it was a shitty input. For anyone that doesn't know, Austrian economics is a specific school of economics that has its own opinions about the world, as everybody loves to have. So it would be like maybe the opposite of how the economy is run today, right? It's like kind of the anti-Keynesian economic school perspective on things. And so it asked me a few questions about like how I would want it to answer. And then it basically just gave me kind of like a history of things that have happened. And it just wasn't very practical. I think the other outputs that I got were very, very practical. And I think that could be the nature of the question that I asked it. And so that was a big takeaway for me. It didn't even tell me how long, by the way, it took to research this, which was interesting. So I think the big takeaway with this one in particular is that it seems to perform best actually when you ask it a question that actually needs deep research done. I think if you ask it a question that's a little too surface level, it's not going to go in there and like blow you away necessarily with crazy insights into something. You do need to be a little bit more deliberate about what it is that you are asking. This is another good example of that, like an extension of it. So I gave it my current supplement stack that I have, and I asked it to just expand on this. So I said, this is the current supplements that I take, and I want you to refine it and give me recommendations based on cutting edge research in health and longevity. It asked me some stuff about my goals. And then it did go out for about 11 minutes because, again, there's like tons of research around this stuff. So it was synthesizing a lot of research. By the way, it does give you all of the activity and what it found when it found it, and then the different sources that it used in this right-hand side bar, which is pretty cool. And so it went through, and it definitely pulled in a lot of insights from different studies. I think it focused a little bit too much on my current stack and what it's good for and all of that type of stuff, and a little bit less on what I was really looking for, which was, hey, what can I like add to this thing, right? So it spent probably, say, 75% of the token outputs on just summarizing back to me what I not that I know all of this stuff, but that like I kind of know to be true. I mean, that's why I'm using those things in the first place, because I met with a doctor and we talked about those things. And so I was looking for this stuff to be more of, additional supplements to consider. I was really looking for this to be more of what it gave me, like just a bunch more of things like this that I hadn't considered and making more specific recommendations. So again, I think that lends itself to, yeah, it's a really cool tool, but you still need to be like pretty specific about what it is you're asking it to do. Because again, I think if we go back to the other prompts I gave it, especially this one, where I was a lot more specific, I got an output that was a lot more like right on the money with the responses. And so last but not least, I haven't actually looked at this output yet, to be honest. This was the vacation planning. So I simply said, hey, I'm looking to go on vacation. It's got to be somewhere incredibly safe. English spoken as a common primary or secondary language. I want to be able to do an entire 7-day trip for less than $5,000 for 2 people. We love food, so a big part of the trip should be frequenting locations known for their food. Ask me some stuff. Sounds like a great trip, the AI tells me. And then I answered a few of their questions, and then it went out, did some research, again, 7 minutes. And let's see what it is saying. We could go to Malta. That sounds fun. Boom, 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 boom. So this is pretty cool because it's doing a lot of the research on like what the actual cost is going to be, which is pretty cool. So flights, 1,400 round trip from the U.S. East Coast in shoulder season. It's pulling that from Google's flights thing that they have. Boutique hotel, $900 for 7 nights. Mid-range hotels in the region, about $130 per night. Pulling from these different blogs. Example, a charming Valletta boutique like this one is $123 a night. It's pretty awesome, actually. $800 for meals and entry fees at different like parks and things like that. Food is pretty affordable. You splurge on a couple of high-end dinners, and then boom. That's pretty awesome. And so one of the things that I asked was in the follow-up that it said, what type of cuisine are you into? And I said, I'm a fan of fine dining. And so if we come down here, it says, despite its small size, Malta's culinary scene is world-class. The island boasts 6 Michelin-starred restaurants. Valletta, Noni, boom. All these different examples, which is pretty awesome. Gave me some sightseeing examples. I think it would be interesting to see how we could plug this type of output into something like the operator and see if it could go through and actually book us out a vacation based on this itinerary. Would be a cool future little thing to mess around with. And so it looks like it gives me a few different examples. Singapore, Edinburgh, Scotland, Barbados. Pretty cool. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you guys in this video. I think this tool really is awesome in a lot of ways. Not available yet, as far as I know. I did research around and couldn't find anything. Trying to find it in the API. So for now, it seems like it's limited to just browser use cases. But if it follows the trend of all of these other tools that OpenAI is releasing, it'll probably be on its way to an API near you soon, which means you can use it in tools like N8N, run it locally on your computer, all of that cool stuff. I hope you found this video helpful. I had fun doing this one, actually. I'm going to start doing more of these breakdowns of new things coming out. This was fun. That is it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.